What I've been banging the drum about for 15 years is that the accounting of these companies, especially the ones that are public outside of China, the numbers cannot be trusted. And we are in a world where I think that matters less and less, a world that is dominated by passive flows, where active investing is receding or has been receding for quite some time. So maybe that matters less. But then you layer on top of that the geopolitical risk. It's funny, this morning we had a meeting with a potential investor, and the meeting was going really well. But at one point they told us that they were pretty invested in China, they were excited about it, and they look at things like that based on geopolitical or assessments of governments, et cetera, and government policy. And at the very end, I made such a mistake from a sales perspective because they asked, well, what do you think of China? And, blah, 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 blah. I think Xi has been an absolute disaster for China. And literally the response was, well, okay, on that note, thanks for coming. So I think that, if you're willing to take the risk that you wake up one day and, China has gone to war to try to retake Taiwan or has barricaded the island, and that could lead to a kinetic war. If you're willing to take that risk, great. There's a price for everything. There's a price for that risk. I've been seeing Westerners like that for a couple decades, not really understanding what category of uninvestable China is in. They'll say the right things from time to time, lure the capital in. And I think that is part of the geopolitical strategy here, because China has always sought to co-opt opinion leaders and key people who are key economic and business leaders, always sought to co-opt them in the West, basically the Western elite. So the more that they can get everybody levered to China, I think Xi is viewing this as a negotiating tactic should he ever make that move on Taiwan. So, I don't know. I think it's different.
But Xi has always talked about making that move on Taiwan, and he hasn't. And perhaps there is sense in that. And perhaps for investors, there's comfort to take from that. You talk about how it is uninvestable, but how do you view the rally we've seen so far? As a trader, as an investor, you're losing out on this rally.
Well, I don't know. I sleep a little better at night, I'd say.
You are hearing the right murmurings from Xi Jinping, on the back of the meeting he's had, for instance, with the tech leaders. Perhaps, he's realizing that he needs to do something differently.
Well, and it's not to say that this is unique to China, but, I lived there for a number of years, and I was actually lied to a decent bit. So and just because China hasn't actually made the move, that has more to do with military readiness. Taking an island from a military perspective is incredibly difficult. Now, if he's going to make that move, the one thing that he's balancing is that the U.S. is obviously increasing our military readiness. And what happened in Ukraine with the firm resistance that the Ukrainians gave the Russians, I think really has given him pause. It'll be interesting to see what the Trump administration is going to do here vis-a-vis Russia and Ukraine, because if Ukrainian interests are reasonably well represented or protected in the, quote, peace talks, which, to be honest, there's not really a strong indication that they will be, but if they were, Ukraine is manufacturing, I think, about, 300,000 drones a month. So for the U.S. strategy the U.S. and Taiwanese strategy to defend the strait is to create a hellscape. So Ukraine actually has a lot to offer there from a military perspective. So that's something that, I think Xi Jinping is watching very closely.
Let's look closely at the rally we've seen so far, pretty much driven by the tech sector. And of course, the key players, Chinese version of the Max 7, the BAT, your Baidu, your Alibaba, your Tencent. It's such a massive rally. We've seen an addition of more than, $1 trillion, I think, in terms of market cap. And that's driven pretty much by DeepSeek, right? Do you buy into that? Do you see that as more hype than anything else?
Well, I'm really not the person to ask about that, but I know some people who kind of know the space. And one of the more interesting takes I've had on this is it's from somebody who's a household name venture capital guy. And what he says is that, he's felt for a long time that large language models have almost hit a wall in terms of how much incremental development can be done. And so for him, DeepSeek, and the headline number of 5.8 million is a misstatement, and that was only for the whatever phase of development. I don't even know the term for it, but the overall cost was far more substantial. But he said this just shows that really with large language models, there's not a lot of additional juice there in terms of what they can do. So, but that's not artificial general intelligence either. And that's where, that's really what both China and U.S., and when I say the U.S., it's the corporate sector, are going after.
So is it fair to deduce then, if you're not buying into that argument, we are not likely to see a broadening of the rally that we're seeing in China?
Oh, man. I mean...
you have strong views.
Well, again,
on this market.
So I think more as an investor as opposed to a trader. There's obviously momentum here behind these names. As somebody who's been a short seller for the past 15 years, you have to respect momentum. You have to respect sentiment. I wouldn't stand in front of this train at this point in time, but I'm not a trader, so I can't tell you that I think, whether I think in the next 1 to 2 months this continues or dissipates.
Let's talk about a stock you've been talking about. Presumably you know it really well, Tesla, right? What do you do with Tesla now that Musk has a role, in a way, in the U.S. government? When you take a look at how it's down, 30% since its high in December. And if you take a look at how Musk is positioning for the company, he says the future of the company lies in robots. That includes the robotaxi, which actually doesn't really look too appealing to me personally. How do you look at Tesla?
It's one thing to ask whether you bet on Elon Musk, but I would not bet against him. So I don't count the capital structure arbitrage trade as betting against him because it was pretty hedged. Maybe that's me being intellectually disingenuous, but I wouldn't bet against him. Now, in terms of the robotaxis, literally, I think he's been saying that Tesla's robotaxi capability is imminent. I think he's been saying that since 2016. So, take that with a grain of salt. And you do see in the U.S., Waymo is offering robotaxi services where I live in Austin. It won't drive on the freeways. My understanding is that Tesla's technology, because they won't use LiDAR, is not up to par with Waymo or even with Cruise. So, I'd be skeptical of that. Do they find a pliable local or state government somewhere in the U.S. that says, okay, you can run this service here? Yeah, maybe, but I don't think it's, even Waymo is not ready for prime time if you're not driving on the freeway.
So, Carson, would you be a buyer of Tesla then, or not?
Well, I'll check with the quantitative screen that we have and let you know.
But as it stands now, given where he is with Trump, given his relationship with Trump, given the chances of him being able to influence regulation, for instance, how does it play into your calculation?
Well, that's really a double-edged sword. One of the things that I was just, marveling over on the, 16-and-a-half-hour flight here was when you look at how Elon Musk has really changed his positioning politically over the years. He used to be a darling of the left, right? Pounding the table that, we need to electrify the economy, we need electric cars, or else we're going to die as a civilization, we're killing ourselves with CO2 emissions, et cetera. Politically, we know that he's totally switched poles. But, he's allied himself very closely with the, no, let's be realistic here about energy transition. If we're going to transition, we need natural gas, we need nuclear, and, electrification is a pipe dream. We don't have the battery technology. That's what the smarter people on the right, and I happen to agree with those views, that's what they're saying. So Elon Musk is now aligned with them. So my question is, with all the focus that he's putting, all the energy he's putting into DOGE, which, by the way, ahead of the election, I had no idea whether this was really just him trying to be a provocateur or whether he was serious. He's serious. He's really focusing on this DOGE, and I think he's actually doing some very interesting things there. But my question then is, in his head, has he admitted to himself that Tesla it's never going to be, that electric vehicles are a long, long way away from supplanting ICEs, and that it's really a niche product, and that it's, and has he convinced himself that, no, we shouldn't be pushing, running head first into trying to electrify the grid or trying to electrify our economy? I wonder if I suspect he has switched views on a macro level, but especially with how he thinks about Tesla. And that would be a little bit embarrassing for him to say publicly. So yeah, maybe just banging the table about, oh, AI and robo-taxis is how he tries to cover up that sentiment shift internally.
It's impossible to talk about the markets without talking about Trump and Trump's tariffs. In fact, we've been so consumed by Trump and his tariffs. How are you looking at the first moves he's made so far? When it comes to China, less than anticipated. Could have been 60, he went 10. But he went full on with Canada and Mexico at 25%. And that's giving some relief, I guess, to markets or investors who are looking at putting money in China, for instance. I mean, how does it shape your calculations when it comes to where you put your money?
The other issue that Trump has, if he's going to really go crazy with tariffs, is inflation. That's a big part of how he won the election. Now, he does have smart people around him. Scott Bessent, Treasury Secretary. I think Scott understands that you can't just go and jack up or impose tariffs on all imports and without causing inflation and a diminution in the standard of living of Americans. So, but what's he going to do and when? And just because he hasn't gone crazy with China doesn't mean that he won't down the line. I mean, it's kind of funny because he's using. I wonder if he might at some point discredit himself with at least his tariff threats. I mean, Colombia didn't let a plane land, right? So he gets on Twitter like, oh, we're going to hit Colombia with these tariffs. Okay, we'll let the plane land. But I mean, how many times can he get to do that? He humiliated Trudeau with the tariff threat. I kind of wonder if the game there, and also with the EU and the tariff threats, I do think that he's trying to push the political left out of power. And I suspect that's because he views that if we get more right-wing governments in the West, we're going to form a better, stronger coalition against China.
One more issue as well, with Trump, there's been a pullback on ESG and diversity. And we've seen a lot of other companies also doing the same. You've always thought about how green companies are, I think in your words, grifters. How do you look at investment in green companies now?
So what I started saying, I began getting questions about ESG. I think it was 2018. And, so I don't know if I was doing a TV hit when I got the first one or if it was print, but when I was asked, what do you think of ESG investing? I said, well, you know what? I think it's the paper straw of investing. Now, it's ironic because I come here and I only get paper straws, and I have to tell you how much I loathe paper straws. I mean, they don't
work.
They are inane. But what did I mean by that? Okay, my analogy was this, because one of the banes of my existence, my daily existence at that time was I would go to Pete's Coffee, I would get a big plastic cup with a plastic lid, and they'd stick a paper straw in it that made my drink taste horrible. And so I looked at this, and I'm like, what are we solving with this paper straw? Like, look at the quantity of plastic in my hands that I'm going to dump into a bin somewhere. We're not solving anything. It's purely performative. Well, that's actually what ESG investing was, and that's what ESG investing still is. It's performative. It's easily gamed.